U.S. Supreme Court has handed President Trump a victory, letting him and his administration use the 1798 law that historically has been employed only in wartime to swiftly deport alleged Venezuelan gang members as part of the Republican president's hardline approach to immigration.
There's been a lot of stuff going on over at the Supreme Court. Got to bring in Mike Davis, Article 3 Project, to walk us through all of it. Davis, where do you want to start?
Well, I would say this. I think that the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, is finally starting to get his judicial house in order after this unprecedented lawfare by these activist judges. President Trump won a broad electoral mandate to cut government waste, fraud, and abuse, to secure our border, to deport illegal immigrants, to especially terrorists. And these activist parties have been going to these activist judges and sabotaging President Trump exercising core Article 2 powers with these unprecedented injunctions and TROs that aren't TROs, temporary restraining orders that aren't temporary. I think the Supreme Court, Justice Amy Coney Barrett in particular, learned her lesson on the fact that just because an activist judge calls something a temporary restraining order, it's not temporary. And so therefore you can immediately appeal it. And so we can't sabotage the president exercising his Article 2 powers. So we saw that with the TRO issue. We saw that with Judge Boasberg getting slapped down by the Supreme Court when he exposed and sabotaged an ongoing military operation 4 Saturdays ago, putting American and allied lives in grave danger so he can save his terrorist buddies from deportation to El Salvador. Look, this is going to be a slog every day, but these are key wins at the Supreme Court that should help get these activist judges in line.
And so when you're looking at all of this, are there any specifics to this? So, for example, we were chatting a little bit in the break, but one of the ones I was looking at, the use of the Alien Enemies Act, I think the fact that that has been brought up and upheld by the Supreme Court is absolutely fantastic. Now, I believe what they did ask for was that there's going to be a hearing process now. How does that work?
Well, that's been the case law for a long time, that you have some sort of a due process. It's not the same due process that American citizens get in the courts. It's just a minimal process on these illegal immigrants and on these foreign terrorists. Are they Tren de Aragua, right? And if they're Tren de Aragua, goodbye. That's your due process under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. And President Trump is going to be able to get these dangerous illegal immigrants, these foreign terrorists like Tren de Aragua, these international gangbangers like MS-13, out of our country quickly, and it's going to make America much safer.
So here's what I ask. Okay, so can we put the judges on the plane so they could make their rulings as they're actually rolled up? Because I come from Philadelphia, and we used to have this down at the Eagles Stadium. We used to have an Eagles court that if you were caught fighting at you were sent down to Eagles jail. Not that I've ever been there. Okay, I was last year. That's a different story that the audience knows well. But you could have the judge right on standby. And haven't there been times also? Actually, I think in Poland. Now that it occurs to me, I think in Poland, this is actually something they were doing. They would have like a magistrate that would go out with Border Patrol so that they could give them basically a hearing right there and say, all right, you're in or you're out.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Jack. I think we need to put Judge Jeb Boasberg on a plane. He tried to expose these ongoing military operations and sabotage them and turn around planes. Apparently he can fly planes because or at least he's an air traffic controller, because he tried to turn around these planes over the Gulf of America. So I think we should put Judge Boasberg, and I bet you he has Green Beret law clerks. I bet you they're not these Harvard law school nerds. I bet you he has Green Berets as his law clerks. And so let's send Judge Boasberg and his Green Beret law clerks down to El Salvador, and he could be the jailhouse judge down in El Salvador, and he can make sure that these prisoners get nice enough pillows and thick enough sheets and comforters for their beds while they're down in El Salvador. I mean, I think that's a really good use for Judge Boasberg. Now that he's not persecuting American citizens after January 6th for the last 4 years. He can go from persecuting Americans to making sure that he's coddling Tren de Aragua, an MS-13 terrorist.
No, I think it's wonderful. I think, gosh, there's lots of judges that I could think of that really ought to be sent down to El Salvador, probably a few to Guantanamo while we're at it. I mean, last time I checked, the United States government has plenty of aircraft, so plenty of available seats for these judges. Probably would only take a couple of planes when we're really talking about it here. They could all go down. And again, they could be handling their due process law. They would be handling the hearings. All of it would be done with the utmost standards while we send them down to El Salvador. But so Davis, when we're looking at this, though, do you really think that what the court's doing here is, as you say, they're trying to get the judicial house in order? One of the big things that we were talking about with these nationwide injunctions really was this question, and in a number of these cases, it gets into the Separation of Powers Act, I think, or the Separation of Powers concept, with the idea that you have judges at a federal district level, got like 500 of them around the country, that are making these rulings from their small jurisdiction that affect the entire nation. And this obviously isn't the system that we were told that we were building, that our founders intended on. They wanted one president to be able to deal with, say, Tren de Aragua. That's an invasion force. It's very simple. So do you think that what they're doing is an attempt to actually push back on nationwide injunctions, or is it more limited?
No, I think it's going to be broader here because, look,
Okay.
Under Article 3 of the Constitution, federal judges have a modest but crucial role, and that is to decide cases or controversies of the parties before the court with redressable claims. You have to have a party before the court, whether it's the parties who are suing or class actions. You can certify class actions with multiple parties, but they have to be parties before the court. And this idea that federal judges can issue relief beyond the parties before the court, that means that judges have legislative power, which they clearly do not have legislative power. The legislative power belongs to our elected members of Congress. It's the most powerful branch. It's accountable to the American people every 2 years in the House, every 6 years in the Senate. We intentionally give the legislative power where we can control them through elections. We don't give legislative power to unelected judges who have lifetime tenure and pay protection. Their job is to protect the rights of minorities. It's not to have majoritarian legislative power. That's quite dangerous for judges to have that power.
And that's the entire point. So for the Supreme Court, then that actually makes sense, because that kind of gets into the jurisdictional nature of the federal court system and the hierarchy as it is. So the Supreme Court is the court that's supposed to actually be setting the norms, setting the standards for the entire country. That's the point of having the Supreme Court. And this, Davis, this is also gets into, I could go down this rabbit hole for a while, but it also gets into the concept that the federal districts are creations of the Supreme Court, not the other way around. Isn't that right?
Yeah, the Supreme Court has the judicial power under Article 3 of the Constitution, and then Congress can create lower courts. Congress can eliminate lower courts. They can't eliminate the Supreme Court. They can't take away the Supreme Court's judicial power, but they can certainly eliminate these lower courts. And these lower courts are supervised by the Supreme Courts. But if the Supreme Court does not step up and supervise these activist judges, if the Supreme Court does not get its judicial house in order, Congress will do it for them. And I'm working very closely with Senator Chuck Grassley, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, my former boss, and Senator John Thune's office and Senator Mike Lee's office, and many other House and Senate offices to bring much needed reforms to these lower federal courts so these activist judges get reined in.